Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Lane, and I am the Dean of the School of Education at the University at Albany. We're thrilled to be able to put on a very timely topic, civil engagement and civility, pre and post-election environment. When emotions are highly charged, interestingly, I think we are neither in pre nor post-election environment right now. We are in the midst of the election environment as we continue to wait to see what the results are. And of course, that I think creates an even more highly charged environment that we are all in right now. But this is certainly a incredibly important topic and a timely one, and we are thrilled to be able to offer it in conjunction with our good colleagues at the Capital Region BOCES. And I am joined today by Dr. Joseph Dragoni, who is the Senior Executive Officer of the Capital Region BOCES, and a Great Dane of the University at Albany as well. So Joe, thank you for being here. Next slide.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. This is one of many in a series that we have been doing in collaboration. School of Education at U Albany. We're thrilled to be part of this. Today's panel brings many perspectives to, again, as Jason pointed out, a very timely issue. So I thank my colleagues that are on the panel for taking their time to do this. I thank Jody Orzechowski from our communication service, who will be moderating the panel for us as well. And this collaboration has been going on, and we'll have many upcoming events as well as we continue this leadership series. So if this is your first time, please join us again. If you've already joined us, you know where to find the information, and we're looking forward to a great session.
So we started these sessions back in the spring when we all pivoted to remote education. At the time, we called them community conversations. It was a way to engage individuals from across the Capital Region and beyond in critical conversations related to education and mental health. We have rebranded as we have moved forward, now calling them our edTrends conversations. As Joe said, they are regularly. We meet weekly at this time every week, and so we hope that you'll continue to join us. And of course, the series with Capital Region BOCES is once a month, and an important conversation around leadership as well. Next slide, Jerry. As part of this, next week we work with the New York State Master Teachers, and they will be doing problem-based and project-based teaching in person and remote. So if you're interested in problem and project-based teaching, we encourage you to turn in for that important conversation as well from real experts in the field. This is part of our overall effort to provide more resources for all teachers and parents and leaders in the education environment. At the University of Albany, we created remoteed.org, which has over 1,500 curated resources that our faculty and graduate students have curated and organized around subject matter and grade level for your use. And of course, the Cap Region BOCES has created Essential Ed. So Joe, let you talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Jason. Again, as we mentioned, since we were providing so many remote resources starting in March, we were about 3 weeks into it, and we launched our Essential Ed website, which has all standards-based aligned resources for teachers and actually for anybody else who wants to experience them as well. It's consistently updated. It's run by our team and Kelly Maslin, our Educational Support Services division. So it's just a tremendous amount of resources to help anyone who's in a remote environment or anybody who needs standards-based resources or content aligned materials to help support teaching and learning while they're off-site, and candidly, they can be used in the classroom as well. So we're very proud of this work. Again, it's consistently updated, and it's widely used throughout New York State, and we're seeing it used throughout the country as well.
So also to note, for those of you who are here and interested in professional education, you can receive CTLE hours for attending the session and doing some additional work. If you're interested in that, please contact Dr. Jerry Rivera-Wilson. Their contact information is there at the bottom and will be available at the end of the session as well. So again, CTLE credit is available. So let me turn the panel over now to Joe. Are you going to introduce Jody?
I would be happy to do that. It's a great pleasure that I introduce my colleague, Jody Orzechowski, who is a member of our communication service. People may or may not know, Capital Region BOCES provides communication services to 150 plus districts around not only throughout the Capital Region, but throughout New York State. Jody has a long history of facilitating not only panels, but doing a lot of community work stakeholder engagement for school districts, whether it comes to superintendent searches or facilities projects, all the big questions that school communities come with throughout our region and beyond. And Jody has been engaged in that work a long time, helping districts see success in how to work with their many stakeholders. So without any further ado, Jody, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. If we want to just take a brief moment for everybody on the panel that we have with us today to introduce themselves, that would be a great way for us to get started. David, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Dave Blanchard, Superintendent of Schools for the Schoharie Central School District. I'm certainly happy to be here and excited to have this discussion with everybody.
Thanks. Dr. Finsel?
Alex Finsel, I'm the Instructional Administrator for English Social Studies Reading and Library at Gilliland High School, and I'm very excited to be here as well.
And Brett Levy? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Brett Levy. I'm an Associate Professor of Educational Theory and Practice at UAlbany, and my research focuses on how young people can become civically engaged through educational experiences.
Natalie McGee.
Hello, I'm Natalie McGee, and I'm president of Progression Partners, Inc. And our work is around equity through the tenets of culture proficiency, whereby we work with, be it schools as well as districts and organizations, to establish equitable practices within the environment. Thank you.
Dr. Medina.
Thank you. My name is Alfredo Medina. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Public Engagement. I'm here at the University of Albany. In my role, I work with all different constituents, faculty, staff, students, as well as external stakeholders, finding ways by which we leverage our own resources as well as our expertise, working with community partners to help address societal challenges. And we do that from a local level to a global level. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. And we also have Penny Ng on the panel today.
Hi, my name is Penny Ng. I'm not one of the presenters, but I'm just hosting the webinar.
Oh, okay. All right. I see you there, but not on the slides. Okay, yep. So let's get started. In 2019, Weber Shandwick is a national public relations firm that had conducted polls on civil discourse in America since 2010, found that Americans firmly united on one thing. 93% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, view the lack of civility in our country as a problem. We also saw a record turnout in early voting across the country this year, and we're, as we stated earlier, not pre or post just yet. We're awaiting final results in states that are just too close to call. In a year unlike any other, from national protests in support of the Black Lives Matter movement to a world crippled by a global pandemic. So I'd like to ask the panel today, the first question is, civic engagement encompasses a wide range of activities, including voting, volunteering, and participating in group activities. In this current climate in which our society has been so divided on issues such as race, healthcare, and politics, how can civic engagement be used as a way to bring students together? Does anyone want to take the lead, or should I call?
I don't mind taking the lead. I can at least get the conversation started. So I think that this work really gets done by getting to know your school community, getting to understand the needs of your students and staff, and really developing a culture of listening to each other and listening for understanding and mutual respect. So if we can develop a highly respectful, positive school climate and culture, then we can move to a more civil community as there becomes issues to tackle. So in Schoharie in particular, we began setting goals for our districts to increase our cultural awareness, to increase our cultural efficiency, and for staff to really understand and embrace differences within our student population, our staff population, and then developed a lot of professional development around that area. So I think to get this work done is a process, it's a commitment, and it takes a lot of effort and thought.
Yes, to add to that, civic engagement is about shared experiences and helping kids and their families and members of the community to understand that they are members of different communities. And civic engagement, popularly, when we think of that as voting, and it's not limited to just voting every 2 years, every 4 years, but it starts with being informed, and it starts with sharing your experiences in a safe manner. One of the things that Gilderland High School has been doing, I give a lot of credit to Mitch Hahn, who's one of our English teachers, is that we try to foster conversations for the purpose of listening to understand rather than to have a conversation to debate opinions. And when you have that ability for all members to be able to express what they feel as a human being, then that is kind of the door opening to have more involved, more complex conversations about how, as a society, how we work together in our political process. But first, we have to have safe discussions, safe environments to be able to open up and share what people understand and what they feel.
I can chime in because as we're looking at ways to bring the students together, we have to ensure that our educators, and be it the adults and those that are going to interface with our students at large, are going to have, be it the professional development that's necessary to actually forge the conversations around differences, around the disparities that we see, around the racism that permeates through organizations and institutions. So we need to make sure that we are, including our educators, that we're including our staff, that we're including stakeholders in the conversations before moving to having those, be it challenging or difficult conversations with the students. But we want to make sure that we're developing this safe atmosphere so that the students can bring themselves to the conversation without a fear of recourse. And so in turn, this is where we have to tap into also the education and the professional development that our adults have, that our classroom teachers have in the organization that we're speaking of before bringing in the students. Thank you.
I just say that it's also important and very sad that we're in this COVID-19 era, and as human beings, we're social creatures. And when we need to connect with one another, we come together and we read each other's body language, our tone. We're communal creatures, and it's even more important, how do we have those conversations in a safe space virtually when we can't be together because of social distancing protocols? And having a Zoom conversation right now is very different than having a face-to-face. And what is the best appropriate way to be able to facilitate those conversations if we even have to use the tech?
I kind of want to piggyback a little bit on what Natalie was saying, especially with understanding sort of students in terms of also their identities, and understand where they are, meet them where they are. I think, for many undergraduates that I interact with here at the University of Albany, when we bring up the conversations about civic engagement, for them, again, it's automatically thinking about that's something that I do as a form of volunteerism or something I do for voting. When we try to use that as sort of a mechanism to have sort of civil discourse, the one thing that I always notice is that there's always a sense of division among students. Students tend to sort of stick within their own, right? What they're most familiar with, what they're more comfortable with. And one of the things that you have to do with many of our students is the same thing that you would have to do probably with a lot of our faculty and our staff at the University of Albany, is help people to find ways to understand sort of their own sense of privilege and power, how that can be perceived by students, especially when you're trying to talk about civic engagement. But yet many of them have always been invisible when it comes to those conversations. How do you make room for them, those conversations, just creating and holding space for them so that when you do come to have conversations, they're not dominated by all of these different scholars and people who seem to have the answers. Because that is the perception that we give off at times when we do civic engagement, is that we come there and we bring in students, and it almost comes across as window dressing, that they really don't have a role in that conversation. And so I think it's just very important that, you know, we understand the different intersections of their identity, ensure inclusivity, create space for them, and give them the floor and just be a listener. And you'd be surprised how much they'd be willing to share once they feel empowered.
So there are a few different things that come to mind for me when I listen to your question, which is a great question. There are the theoretical and broad perspectives about how to think about this problem of incivility. And then there are the steps that we take. And I really appreciate the comments that I've heard so far, that listening is key, community building is key, professional development is key. And these are all steps along the way. But when it comes to civic engagement, what is it? And that's come up, you know, Alex and Alfredo mentioned that. And I think this book kind of jumps out at me. This won the American Educational Research Association Book Award in 2015. It's by the Dean of the University of Wisconsin School of Education. Big question that she says is at the heart of The Political Classroom, which is the name of her book, is how should we live together? How should we live together? It's a very basic question, but it's one that can be approached at a lot of different levels. And so when it comes to what civic engagement is, it's kind of our step towards figuring out how to live together, how to make choices. There's so many ways that we make choices. We make choices in the things that we buy. We make choices in the ways that we talk to people. We make choices in the ways that we vote, of course, in the ways that we participate in the government. But there's so many other ways that we participate. And Peter Levine, in this book, he's like the founder of the Center for Information and Research, Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University. He wrote this book called We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For. It came out in 2013. But the basic thing that he argues for there is there are three elements, and I think these two things go together. How should we live together? But then what are the elements of that? And he says that like civic renewal and a healthy society where we are figuring out how to live together requires three things: relationships, deliberation, and collaboration. And I think a lot of people so far have mentioned relationships, and I think that's fundamental. So how do we create relationships where we all trust each other and we can break through barriers, differences, et cetera? How do we learn to see each other as human, you know, and not just like our political stripes or our ethnic, racial, religious backgrounds, et cetera? How do we like look through those things? So it could start like one-on-one. Sometimes it starts with individual identity. Who am I? And then how do I connect with somebody else and break through anything? And what commonalities might we have? And then you build out from, okay, we can work in pairs, we can work in groups, like just getting to know each other in small groups. Then we reach out to the class. Then it's like across classes. Then it's then it's school level. Then it's across schools. I'm trying to get two schools to connect right now in a study that I'm doing right now, North Carolina and New York. How are they going to talk to each other across political divisions? But that's kind of a big jump. You know, first they have to learn to talk to each other. And so there's the relationships piece. Then there's the deliberation piece, which is how do we make a decision about something? Once we have relationships and we trust each other and we have some ground rules for how to interact, how do we work towards a decision about something? You know, it could start with something really basic and low stakes, like for our party as a class when we finally meet, or even, there could be things to decide in a Zoom classroom. Should we have pretzels or pizza? Let's just something like let's discuss this low stakes thing, then build up to, you know, should this Supreme Court nomination go through? Like don't jump. I would say we shouldn't jump right to the super sticky, potentially inflammatory things. If people learn how to talk to each other, I acknowledge your point. I hear you. Here's why I disagree. This conflicts with my values about X, Y, or Z. I appreciate your values about A, B, and C. And these are things that we're going to learn to agree to disagree. And that's a hard thing to do, agree to disagree. But I think that starts with good relationships and then learning how to deliberate. And then finally, collaboration being that thing where we actually do something. We actually try to do something together. And that's not something we do a lot in schools when it comes to going outside the school walls. So Why not start within the school walls? Are there ways that we can make our classroom community better? Can we have a recycling program in the school? Can we at least reduce the amount of paper waste that we're using right here? Can we talk to each other in a more kind way? Can we do something better on the chat rooms? What should our protocols for the online discussions be? Let's just figure out how to work together and make that's a form of collaboration. It could be bigger than that. We all agree that school funding should be better. How can we all work together on that? There's certain things that they could work on together that they might agree on. So those are my thoughts. How should we live together being a central question at the heart of civic engagement? And then the 3 elements that I think are important to it based on Peter Levine's theoretical work. He's like a political philosopher. Relationships, deliberation, and collaboration.
Thank you, Brett.
Brett,
go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's really important that you had mentioned, the baby steps and, looking at single issues, picking pretzels between popcorn and then working your way up to, considering the effect of a Supreme Court nominee. But beyond the single issues and helping students to either have a yes or no, we also, I think part of the problem in trying to have the civic discourse that we want to have is that in our political system, there's a homogenization that takes place where each party is built on planks of a variety of issues. And from an individual's point of view, everyone's going to prioritize the issue that they feel is the most important in their stance on that. And that's going to drive their affiliation with the political party. And how do we, as members of our community, help to deconstruct that into conversation? So if somebody is claiming allegiance to one political party, that we help to have the students in anyone express why that is. I'm choosing this particular party because healthcare is the most important thing to me because I have a grandparent who's suffering. And I think from a human to human, they can understand that. And they're not going to be leaping to assumptions to say, oh, because you're supporting this party, you must believe 1, 2, and 3.
So these points are kind of leading into the next question that, the notion that our country is severely lacking in the civility piece. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, Alex, as you brought up the human piece of things, and that leads to greater understanding because you can apply it into someone's life. But, among the reasons that people cite as contributing to this incivility are the anonymous attacks and this spreading of false or misleading information on social or, online news sources that really just creates an echo chamber. And it really serves to harden people's positions versus opening their eyes and understanding that, everybody has an opinion, but they're all important for different reasons. So really, how do you teach students civility in this kind of current societal norm where we really are likely to see the rudeness, the threats, the bullying, and personal attacks online? And I'm assuming, for some of you that might even be happening in person in your classrooms sometimes, when it's safe to have those in-person classes again, if they're not happening yet.
So Jody, I'll start again. And I think it's laying out expectations for the climate and culture of the school, laying out expectations for climate and culture of the individual classroom, where class discussions are open and people get to express their opinions and there's kindness and respect. We talked a lot about listening and speaking, and, I kind of thought, and I think a lot about, Stephen Covey and, listening for understanding before seeking to be understood, that idea that when you're engaging in dialogue, it has to be respectful. Our district has taken it a step further because we've done a lot of equity work within the district, training both staff and students. So we designed coursework and have implemented a lot of the equity things that we're doing into our curriculum, but we created classrooms for classes for kids in grades 6, 7, and 8 that really teach civility, but they teach empathy and understanding and identity development. So these courses are not part of the New York State curriculum, so to speak. There's something we've done in addition. We started 2 years ago with a partnership with Hastings on the Hudson district downstate, and so I just think that it takes a lot of effort to try to create a culture that is respectful and responsive to differences and accepting other people's differences and their opinions in a respectful way.
I think that takes practice. What are the ways that we talk to each other in a way that is respectful and understanding? And part of it is going to be about the relationships piece, I think, and getting to know each other. But then part of developing a relationship is learning how to listen and not just think of yourself. So it's partly what you do, partly how you feel, but those things interact with each other. If you never ask anybody a question, then you're never going to learn anything about somebody else and actually get insights into who they are. So how can we help people learn to do that from the very early grades, very early ages?
I'd add too, it's also about helping kids understand the medium and setting of communication, where, this is, David said this right, it's about dialogue, and dialogue goes back and forth, and what is the best medium to have an appropriate two-way conversation to listen to understand. It certainly is not on Twitter. It's certainly not on these reactive blasts. Unfortunately, technology brings some really great things and some really poor things. And, social media is great for broadcasting alerts, for just to keep people aware that something is happening. But in terms of trying to facilitate meaningful conversations, I'm not sure that social media is the best avenue to broach that, and helping students to understand that if you have something that's important, when you go to Twitter or social media, it's not a private conversation per se, it's out there, which can be damaging, versus having a more private conversation in safe spaces that's limited to human beings. That, sometimes you need to have what's said in the room stays in the room, so that you have a level of comfort, versus something that has a digital footprint that can come back to haunt you later on in life.
I believe that within the climate now, that avoiding having the conversation actually then in turn speaks volumes to the students and the young people in which we serve. Because when we're in avoidance, then what we have done then is set up disparities between, one, be it the professionals and the students are looking at themselves, and we're devaluing like who they are, their life experience, their own social identities. And so it is imperative that we have the conversations, that we begin the conversations, those sensitive conversations, be it around race, be it around their personal identity, also be it around what's happening in our society. What I've said earlier, because I feel that our students are ready to have the conversation, but oftentimes within the adults may not be so ready. So we want to make sure that what we do is set up guidelines, whereby the guidelines is how we're going to communicate, how we're going to disagree, one, respectfully and effectively, how we can disagree, because it's okay to disagree. We don't have to be of like minds. But what we do ask is for our educators to be in the position of the facilitator of the learning, to structure the facilitation so that the conversations can be had, to structure the facilitation. So then we move into having this shared goals within our own community of our classroom, and then absolutely moving them and so that they actually foster empathy amongst whatever social groups or social norms that we're looking at, or disparities within our own society or community, so that there is a level of empathy taking place. And then how might we move them to, one, taking the position of an ally, right? Because ultimately when we're speaking on this, we're speaking about them, our students getting involved. So then talking to them about what might that look like to be an ally. And so again, if we're talking about social media, and one of the things we share with them is like, with the negativity and, with the discourse that's out there, of course, not to get involved with that, but we want to serve alongside those, to support when you see injustice taking place, one, when you see the injustice, to support the other, because we've moved to that place of empathy so that we can be an ally for the good works that actually need to take place. So within our everyday, and yes, you can, we've talked about several things that we can do in the course of talking with students. We talked about, doing blogs, ensuring, even in the classroom, doing like mock protests. There's several things that, and I'm going like K-12, that can take place to move them to the position of exercising their civic duties into that space. Talking about, as we talk about within the social justice, what might that look like? And to bringing all of those pieces together in the conversations. Because when having the conversations, I'm going to talk about race and racism, becomes a norm, when having the conversations about race, when having the conversations about disparities, when having the conversations about racism moves to the place when a norm, then we can move to equity. But if we remain muzzled, then we stay each within our perspective corners around, and we stay in the same place.
Yeah, I like that idea. Well, there are two big things that jump out at me from what you said, Natalie, that I really like. One is about PD, professional development. That's huge. And like, how can we help adults have that conversation and help guide that conversation? And it's really important for people to be comfortable with it. And how can we create models and give educators the opportunity to work together on these types of things? So it could be that there's some sort of coordinated effort at a given school, or maybe 2 teachers try something, or 3 teachers try something, and they talk about it and they say, we're going to have a discussion about, we're going to have a post-election discussion about, or like, we're going to debrief on, let's say we never had a chance to talk about the Black Lives Matter, protest that emerged, last spring, and we never actually really unpacked that. Why don't we delve into that? And it could be in a social studies class, and it could be linked to the curriculum if teachers are trying to stay with the pacing guide or whatever. But it could be, what are the links to history, and what are the connections to current events and things like that. That's always been a concern for teachers that I've worked with, the pacing guides, and like, there's so much they're trying to get through. They want everyone to pass the regents. So how do you make room for these types of things? I think we really have to help them figure out how to do it. And that's part of PD also. But then there's the ally part. I really like the idea of becoming allies. So what can you do with that? Because I think that's one of the things that's hard for educators and maybe everybody. Like, I see these problems, what can I do about it? And being an ally is a nice first step. What organization can I support? At the school level, at the state level, at the local level, at the friend level, how can I be a good friend to somebody? How can I just ask a question to somebody, like, for any of these issues that we might be experiencing, and any of these challenges that we're experiencing in our broader context as we go through these tumultuous times.
Alfredo.
I agree with everything everyone said here, and it actually helps me to kind of bring up one issue that I think, well, there's actually 2. Let me first address the first one, and that is, again, that when we think about the exchange that's going on social media, especially with our younger students, many of them are just modeling what they're seeing in adults. I couldn't even tell you. I actually had to log off Facebook today because the level of civil discourse and angst and just nastiness that was going on there, primarily being taken place by adults. And I sit there and think, how students are just basically modeling what they're seeing in their educators and their parents and their relatives. And for them, we're establishing that this is the norm, that this is how we deal when we have disagreements. And so I think it starts there with ourselves. I can't remember which, it might have been Alex, I think, who might have mentioned about starting with self, right? You need to recognize sort of, how you're going about addressing these issues. And that part of that, I just think it's impulsiveness. I know that just from having, 4 kids and all young adults, that the minute they see something that they disagree with, they want to just jump on that thread. And I always just say to them, before you do that, I go, have you thought through what you're trying to convey? Because there's a difference between just, sort of vomiting everything that's on your mind, as opposed to really taking the time to really think, how are you going to structure your argument? And so, I'm not, what I do is encourage, if you are going to participate in that, because this generation is about social media. It's through TikTok, it's through Instagram, it's their medium, it's how they communicate. It's trying to help them say, okay, there's another way to do it, but also trying to meet them and say, if that is your vehicle and we know you're not going to give up those devices, how can we help them in utilizing that medium as a way to be civil? The second part of this too is deal with this phenomenon of the cancel culture, where if anyone posts up one thing that they're in disagreement with, they're automatically canceled, right? There's not even room for conversation. There's not even room for that person to defend their position. It's automatically, sort of the pack just goes after this person and discredits them. And that's where you see the bullying, the threats, because it's one person who just feels a certain way and they're strong about their conviction. And if a majority of their friends feel like we don't like that, we're just going to cancel you. And cancel culture is a really big thing, particularly among Gen Zers and millennials. That is just by the way they just shut things down. And then when they shut it down, there is no room for conversation. And so you have to find ways to sort of deal with this cancel culture because in many ways, if any, it's doing more harm because now they're not having the conversation. And they're creating their own scenarios about what they think others are saying about them. And I think even most recently, President Obama actually had put out something about that. And then he got attacked for calling out cancel culture. And so I would say that that these are the kind of conversations we need to be having with students is really one of, why are they so quick to cancel people? And have that conversation, but also understand that these mediums for how they communicate are not going anywhere. And so rather than sort of create sort of Zoom environments where we think, which we all know is a better environment for having these civil conversations, and they are, the majority of the time they're on their phones. And if you've ever been at the University at Albany, when they were walking around campus, literally their heads are down and they're looking at their phone. There isn't even any human interaction other than they're passing by each other. And so that's their world. How do we meet them where they are to help them, in having civil discourse, even if it meant using their devices?
Yeah, I'd add that too. I mean, again, part of the problem with the things that are very polarizing is that it evokes emotion. And, I think we've all been there when we are upset and we have a moment. Do I send out that email? Do I engage right now? But I know if I do it right now, I'm going to say something I'm going to regret, and I need to kind of take a time out, count to 10, revisit it later. But with our kids and all adults, everyone, when you have your phone with you and something comes your way, it's just so easy just to kind of react. And it just acts as a negative catalyst. And you have to help our kids kind of hold on to an idea for a moment and process it and engage it, have it marinate, and then participate, rather than just to get the hot potato and throw it and unintentionally do harm, not only to oneself, but kind of adding steam to something that is very explosive.
I think this is always the role that schools have been able to play, creating a place, a safe space where ideas can be explored that may not be able to be explored as peacefully beyond the classroom walls. As educators, we have the opportunity to have students right there for 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, to engage in the activities that we design and guide that experience, and ideally connect it to what goes on beyond the classrooms. And I think it's really important to bring in things that are from outside the classroom, especially some of those habits of like, how do we engage or not engage with this? And Alfredo, you mentioned such an interesting and challenging point of just the whole culture of, I've heard this described as like an external brain, we're cyborgs. There's like a field called cyborg psychology because we have our external brains right here all the time. How does that affect us and people who have grown up like that when it can just be instant? That's a whole different discussion. But I mean, I don't want to talk about the possibility of a movement against that, but could there be like an anti-technology group that emerges? Certainly there is among parents, like the less like the non-screen group of parents that exists or at a lot of schools. There's like maybe a cluster at some schools that are kind of like, we don't do as many screens, or we don't do screens at all until a certain age, or whatever, different topic. But I think that it's related because we can help people have that safe space to discuss these issues, and then talk about at least how they're going to engage in what they're doing on their phones. And how kind are you going to be? How civil are you going to be? What is this going to do to the broader community beyond, your own household or your own self?
So to follow up on that point, I want to skip to question 4 and actually talk about, in this emotionally charged environment with so much uncertainty and concerns about the future, how have you seen your students' interest in civic engagement change, whether that's for better or worse?
So I guess I can start again. On my screen, I'm at the top of the screen, so it makes it easy. I think the loudest people, we've had some modeling at the highest levels in government where the loudest voice, the loudest person gets the most attention and can quickly and easily shut down other voices. We're certainly seeing that in our classrooms. We're seeing that with our students. And as I've talked to teachers about this issue, how do they make sure every voice is heard in a classroom related to an issue? And teaching kids how to debate and how to debate appropriately is really important to get everybody's voices heard. But we certainly do have a concern that students are being shut down because they're more passive or they're not as willing to speak their opinion. So we've seen it here in our schools. It's a concern and something that I think is really important for us to talk about.
I know at the University at Albany, I've seen it somewhat get worse, and it's okay to get there because eventually it's going to get better because now it's out there. And while it's wonderful to work and have a diversity that we have at the University at Albany, where more than 40% of our students are, will self-identify as either Black or Brown. And actually, when you combine both African-American, Latinx, and Asian students, they surpass that. They're pretty much the emerging majority. But with that comes a lot of challenges because there creates a certain level of angst when it comes to conversations centered around matters of the different intersections in someone's identity. It's also issues dealing with BLM. These conversations are very difficult to have because it's really presenting challenges in ways where they feel like, why aren't we being louder about it? Why is it that we have to be so silent and quiet when it comes to dealing with matters that pertain to themselves? And so what happens is they react. They tend to really get upset about it. And then again, what do? They take it to social media because they figure if I voice my concern through social media, someone's going to listen. Or they'll do is they'll end up tagging me just about everything because they figure, Alfredo Medina will see this because I also play a dual role in Office of Diversity and Inclusion. He'll see it and he's going to have to do something about it. And so it has gotten worse as a result of there are just groups on campus that are really about all lives matter. There are groups that are about Black Lives Matter, and that creates a lot of that discourse. However, what we're seeing is that we're listening to them, we're hearing it. We're going about finding ways to, again, meet them where they are and to have conversations. As a matter of fact, we just had a conversation with a group of students who were upset about something, and we cleared our schedule to have a conversation with them and find opportunities by which we go to them and say, okay, you brought this to us, right? Do you have some solutions on how we can go about addressing this? And they've already started thinking about some programs that they would like to co-sponsor with us. But that's because we're making that now as a priority, where in the past, I think we dealt with matters of diversity, inclusion, and equity as, more reactive. And now that it's become more proactive, I think students are really starting to say, okay, listen, rather than get really upset, why don't we just bring these issues directly to the leadership and see how they respond, which to me is a step in the right direction.
And I can chime in here. one of the things that I recognize, especially when we move into the conversations with students, we have to recognize how to get into the conversation effectively. And so just like with the adults, we're going to assess our readiness to move into the conversations, but we have to do the same with the students. How prepared are they to have the conversations around whatever sensitive topic that we're speaking of? And so there's several strategies that we work with educators on how to assess our students also readiness to move into the conversation. We use, of course, like the emotion meter. We use, the 5 fingers. So tell me, where you're at within this topic, but also moving into the conversation. Then we have to exit effectively as well, because we don't want to just leave a conversation and kind of leave it hanging in the wind and leave the last voice that has spoken, be it positive or negative. But what we want to do is give our students an opportunity to reflect over what was heard, what was said, and then also to tap into their own perspective about where they're at. And so within leaving the conversations, we offer also some suggestions for educators of how we're going to actually lead the conversation. Just top of mind, I'm thinking about one that we use quite often, where we're asking them to share, we'll do like a 60-second share, and you'll share something you appreciated, an aha, or an apology. Because oftentimes within the midst of having the conversation, then the awareness, the information hopefully will come forth. And sometimes we leave space to, recognizing that each of us as humans, we need to speak to something that, it didn't come out right. It was like we call the pre-competence. I kind of missed the mark on this. I misspoke. I said it this way. I really meant this way. And so giving them space in that conversation, and I'm saying within that conversation, to do some repair, recognizing that we're humans, to do some repair, not just so the importance here that I'm speaking of is not just leaving the conversation and dropping it and saying, oh, now we have to go into, this next subject area, but we want to leave effectively. And I know many of our educators across several of the districts are using the restorative circles, whereby we're sharing speaking time, we're sharing air time, so that each of the students' voice can be heard, as well as they can also pass. So if they're not, up to it on that day, then they can pass and move on to someone else. But my point is we have to move into the conversation effectively and be able to leave the conversation effectively, because what we want to do is ensure that we preserve the dignity and the worth of each of our individuals and each of our students before leaving.
In terms of something that I've noticed just even today, working with some kids in a lunch study hall, is that in addition to helping to facilitate conversation among kids, I think an equally important secondary thing to not lose sight of is that we also need to be able to help our kids to be able to have conversations with their parents, because the family is the most important political socializing agent, followed by school. And differences in generations affect one's values, which are not static; they can be fluid. But just today I was listening to somebody express how they had a difficult conversation, that they didn't understand their father's take on one opinion, and they were expressing their own opinion. And in as much as a student might feel like, I don't want to say anything amongst my peers, students may feel that they can't say anything at home. And that's another way of shutting down conversations. And we need to be able to help students to have conversations at home, and also help their parents to have those conversations at home with their children as well.
I think that's a really valid point, and especially in this environment. And it's kind of it leads into the next question about really shutting down and folks choosing to remain silent. One, because they're fearful of conflict, or they're unsure of their position, or, really trying to safeguard the personal and professional relationships that already exist. And they fear that, that could change. But as we know, it can be detrimental to the environment that you're trying to create in a school setting. So how do you encourage that civil and healthy dialogue? I know Natalie mentioned restorative circles, but what are some of the other ways that you've seen or are trying to practice to make sure that you are ensuring that mutual understanding and respect?
I guess I'll keep. I didn't want to stay.
I was about to say it's okay, Dave, and then I was on mute. So.
Yeah, I was gonna try to vary things up. So, but anyway, I think how do we do it I'm going to look at it from an organizational standpoint, because as a school superintendent, I look at the entire organization and how do we make sure that we're engaged in dialogue about issues. It starts with our goals, and within the organization, every single board meeting, I have an agenda item that talks about equity and cultural proficiency, that we're embracing differences and we understand that we're a diverse school community, that we have kids who live below the poverty level, we have kids who are multiracial or biracial, we have a high number of special needs students. So within our discussions, our equity committee, our equity coordinator, we're trying to meet that goal by discussing it not just at the board meetings, but then at each school faculty meeting. We have time for these discussions. We make time for these discussions, and certainly by bringing in people like Natalie to help us work on these issues and get teachers comfortable with having these types of discussions. So that's from an organizational standpoint.
Thank you.
Just the training.
And then we do, and we. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
What I do notice that when folks remain silent about something to avoid that conflict, and at least those who can approach me about those issues, because I know how students are going to perceive it, is that in many cases they themselves really don't know where to start and how they're going to sort of convey why their views are the views that they believe in, and they feel that by remaining silent, that it's going to preserve at least what we have going on. And I've always said, you always got to live your truth, and we have to find ways where whatever your truth is there something there that is part of how, sort of how you were socialized, how you were raised, that makes you believe that, and then when I start having these conversations, specifically with people who are in positions who are educators, again, students are one thing. When I'm having these conversations with adults who are educators, or they could be administrators at the university, the first thing we do is that, they may come to my office and feel safe with me to tell me why they feel the way that they do and why it's hard for them to sort of say the things that they want to say because they don't want to be seen as a bad person. And so we start with having just conversations, and a lot of that at times requires sort of doing just some internal sort of work that you have to do with your own self. I can tell you that myself being raised in a family where I was, racialized as a Latino growing up, I remember just growing up in my community, just hearing very anti-Black views. And it was very confusing for me because my relatives were phenotypically Black. And so that made it real difficult for me to try to grasp and understand why certain people were behaving in certain ways. And then what I realized is that until you have those conversations about things you're carrying with you that you don't necessarily believe in, but you don't know how to convey them because you're afraid you're going to sort of ostracize yourself from other people, is to really start, I think, with a lot of internal work, and is to find somebody who you feel safe with and trusting to have those conversations with. Because my thing is that those individuals may end up doing more harm to the students because they haven't done the work themselves. And it's just something that they were socialized, and that's how they were raised. And they sometimes say, the reason I believe this is because that's all I've known all my life, and I can't give you a reason as to why I still believe it. I just do because it's so entrenched. And so it's having those conversations, at least what I know when I have conversations with educators, before they interact with students is that, well, let's find out what's going on there. Because in the end, you trying to stay quiet to keep from not having, not hurting your relationship with other educators because of what they are going to perceive in you. To me, it's, that silence speaks volumes, and they're going to read through that. And they're going to wonder, why are you always so neutral? And so part of that is just finding ways to create a safe space or create relationships that allow people to want to come and talk to you about things that they're dealing with.
I just want to add to that real quick. I mean, in addition to helping teachers, educators to be able to facilitate the conversations, knowing when to get in, to get out, to set up the ground rules, it's also equally important to make sure that educators have a good background of content knowledge, because they're going to need to feel comfortable to be able to know if someone makes a claim that is false, then a teacher, an educator is going to need to be able to step in there and feel comfortable just to clarify so that they can have a role in guiding and steering. And I think most importantly, we have to model what we want our kids to be able to do. I mean, it's a cultural thing. So to say that we want teachers to facilitate it, we need to have our teachers engage in this very same process so they understand that experience. They understand that level of discomfort. They understand that level of the need to have safe spaces. They have the need to be able to be heard so that they can do that themselves when they have the training to facilitate and they have that content background.
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts. Just a lot of great ideas. But I think two things jump out at me. One, protocols, and two, content. So I really like the idea of the restorative circles. I think that's fantastic. When it comes to what the goal is, what are we trying to do and how much time do we have and what is the specific goal of this specific space right here? So if we're talking about like a classroom, that is like a history classroom or an English classroom or a math classroom, then there are going to be different goals. But a restorative circle that has that intention has its own, kinds of goals. So so what are you trying to open up? And so I think what you do, like in terms of strategy and protocols, may depend on what you're trying to do in that specific space. But one thing just at the classroom level, since I think a lot about the classroom level, is just try to find a way to give everybody the chance to talk. And the simplest, very powerful thing that I've used again and again is the think, pair, share. It's so simple, but it has worked in so many things. You give everybody the chance to think for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, write down their thoughts, process their thoughts, talk to one person. I can talk to one person. Everybody can talk to one person and be heard. Have somebody look in my eyes and tell me back. There could be specific protocols for what you do in the share. Like repeat back what the person says to you. And then you feel like you have an ally there. Somebody's listening to you. Somebody cares what you have to say. And then you feel the same way about somebody else. And then you could break it up into, 4 people, 6 people, 8 people, and then the whole group. Sometimes these sensitive conversations about social studies, history, civics, racial issues, or other types of conflicts in the school, like they could happen in a full group situation. Okay, here's the idea. Here's the poem. How are we going to talk? What do you think? And then, I'm going to come out and I think David was talking about the loudest voice, being heard and shutting others down. Well, if everybody has an ally, everybody gets to talk to somebody in a pair first, after they've collected their thoughts. That gives everybody the chance to practice what they have to say, collect their thoughts, communicate their thoughts, articulate their thoughts in a very clear way. And then they might get to practice it again in a group of 4, and then boom, then they're ready for the full group. Everybody has a chance to talk. So that's the think, pair, share. And I just feel like it's really powerful in a lot of different contexts. And before you get to the full group, there can be protocols. There can actually be a think, pair, share about the protocol itself. Like, how should we live together? How should we discuss issues on which we might disagree? I do this with every one of my classes on the first day. How should we discuss issues on which we might disagree? And so we develop a list of discussion norms, and then we all agree on them. We discuss that. We have a think, pair, share about those norms. And so inevitably people always say the same thing, listen to other people, be prepared, be open to different perspectives. And they come up with the same things that I would have just told them. I could have created this list of 5 ground rules. They come up with them. But these are graduate students. But I imagine high school students, middle school students might come up with a lot of the same ideas. They might just not put them in exactly the same types of words. So I just wanted to make those points about the value of protocols. And I think the think, pair, share is a great one, and restorative circles are great. And then, these are going to vary based on the purposes of the context.
Well, thank you for all of those thoughts. We're out of time, so I'm not going to continue with the conversation, but so much to consider and really digest in terms of how we approach conversations, even as early as tomorrow, hopefully, when we know some election results, if that's the case. But really, thank you all so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and your expertise and encouragement with everybody who's attended.